All right, we're back. We are game 3001 in the summer of 2019 at George Brown, week 6, part 2 of our broadcast. Let's take a look at the challenge solution. So what I said was before the break is let's replace these 1.5s with some kind of value that we can, so it's not hard-coded. That's great. Use solution square. So that's what I want to do. So one thing to do is in the tile class, in order for me to do this, in the tile class itself, I have to create some variables. So one of the thoughts earlier today was creating static variables. Remember, static variables, the way they work is I change one static variable and change it for all of them because they should have the same factor, right? So we'll put some static variables in place in the private area of our code. That's part 1. So static floats. I also want to have some way of some getters and setters to access those variables, right? So I kind of put those in place. So get Manhattan factor. By the way, I spelled Manhattan wrong. Let's fix that. I'm going to rename that in a second. I will rename it after this because I've named it everywhere else. Go up here. Let's change it. So you have to have all this as well in the tile.cpp, right? Because that's part of the thing you have to do for making statics. And also, I'm going to enable all this stuff, which enables my getters and setters that I did earlier today. So all these getters and setters do is they modify the, or they return the values. So let's go back up to my tile.h and change that because that's really bugging me. But rename to Manhattan with 2 T's, I'll be okay. I don't know what I was thinking earlier. Yay, it changes all that stuff and it's changed, fantastic. And I also want to change the name of my getters and setters, why not? Now, getters and setters that I'm using are basic, just like everything else. So rename, Manhattan factor. So they just return a pointer, right? So they return a pointer to this, and I'll talk about why I need a pointer in a bit, okay? I needed to return a reference to the original value. I don't want to have these exposed, the statics. They're private statics, that's what they are, as opposed to public statics. I want to return them through a getter and setter. Okay, that's number 1. 2, in my setter, right, I get a factor, so it's looking for a new factor, whatever the new factor is. Let's say, for example, I want to change from 1.5 to a 1. I pass the new factor here. I set the new factor up, right? And then I call set target distance. So why would I do that? Set target distance, remember? That was the function that we had up here. Here's set target distance. Set target distance would respawn or rejig all my values for my entire grid, right? That's what it does. Yeah. I just made them. Like that, those getters and setters, I just made them right now. So basically, again, what I did was, going through it, I had, first of all, static floats that I created down here. Again, I'm recording this for you guys, right? I also had some 4 function signatures up here, right? And what those function signatures do, one is it sets a float, and the other one is it gets a float pointer, right? So I can have access to the data, and I'm going to need that in a second. Those are the 2 things I need to do. And if I look at the tile CPP inside of those functions, like they literally, all they do, so all I've coded them to do is like just return. So the getter returns a pointer to the Manhattan factor float. That's all it does. So I'm passing a reference out. So I can access the actual object directly. I'm not copying it. I'm not making a copy. I'm actually passing a float. Here, what I'm also doing is I'm making a copy of the new factor, and then as soon as I do that, I copy it in. But what I'm actually doing here is I'm calling set target distance, which rejigs all my values. I only want to do this one time. I don't want to set my target distance every frame. Otherwise, it'll be like literally flashing. Like all this stuff will be changing too often. I'll have a memory leak. So that's what those things do. Great. So the next thing I want to do once I have that is I want to change that up in here where it says set target distance. I want to start using my Manhattan factor and my Euclidean factor. So I'm just going to comment this line out, line 154, and just put them back in around, I would say M target distance is Manhattan with 2 T's times my Manhattan heuristic, right? And then my Euclidean factor times my Euclidean heuristic. All right. Now again, in the real world, I wouldn't have both. Hell, I wouldn't even multiply by anything. You have to, this is for you to do. It's your to do for assignment 2. Okay. So you got to figure out what works for you for your world. How you assign for pass and all that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. So now that I've done this, I have the means, I have the way of accessing these two things. And now I have to change them. So that's step 1. Step 2, I got to make the user interface that I'm going to show. So I'm going to go back to my game.cpp. And I had a dummy variable I want to get rid of. I don't need it anymore. Actually, I'll leave that for now. Because I used something called the new float, because I'll talk about what I did. There's a bit of an issue the last class. So what I want to do is, I want to go all the way down to where I have my, above my input handler into my IM GUI UI, this update UI, which is around line 418. And I want to create 2 they're like drag floats, and they kind of look like this, slider floats. That's what they're like. So I want to take this code here, slider floats, right? Here's my slider float. And what I want to do is, I also want a separator. So I want to talk about separators for a second. But for now, let's just go up here. So I'm going to go up to where I want to have kind of at the top of my code, right? Here's my top of my code. Before my buttons. And what I want to do is I want to modify, for now, I want to modify just so that I can do it. I want to have a slider float that modifies the Manhattan factor. So we'll call this Manhattan factor. And for this part, it requires a reference to the float, but it needs the reference. And that's why I passed out when I do my getter, I passed out the float to my getter. Now, I need one of them, remember? I only need one reference. So how do I do that? I can use my grid location. So again, I can say m_p grid. And I know that if I modify 1, all of them get modified. I'm getting a value for all of them here. So grid, I want to look at get Manhattan factor. And get Manhattan factor will actually pass in a reference, remember, a pointer to that particular object. Now, it's not going to be from 0 to 800. It's going to be from, let's say, 0.1 to about, I don't know, 10. Okay, that's where I want it to. 0.1 to 10. I definitely want a factor that's higher here than 0. I want to go to 1. And what I want to do is, as soon as I change this, right, so I change this number, whatever it is, I read the number, I change the number, and then when I change it, I want to access the grid again. But instead of get Manhattan factor, I want to set Manhattan factor with the factor that I just got. So again, what I can do is I can pass in whatever this value is, or I can create a temporary variable. Let's call it a float. We'll call this the new factor, just to make it clear. And new factor will be a reference to this value. A little bit redundant, but that's okay for now. But remember that it passes in a reference, and I don't want to pass in a reference. I want to pass in the value. I want to dereference this, and I want to get the value of the pointer. That's what I want. Once I got the value, I can pass in the new factor, and if I do everything correctly, I should be able to modify, wow, I should be able to modify my my Manhattan factor right off the top. Let's try it out. So this is the slider float idea, and I will move it around. Right now it's at the top of my screen. When it comes up, you'll see it, but we'll move it somewhere else where it makes sense. And there it is. Here's my Manhattan factor, right? So let's see what it does. Let's turn on the grid. So here's the grid. Now if I change this, it should change the numbers right away. Let's see that. So no change, right? However, I'm able to do this, but there's no change here, right? Which means it's not doing what it's supposed to do. But first things first. First, I want to change this number, right? So, you know, you can see that these numbers are changing. First of all, the other thing we can do to troubleshoot this is, hey, let's print out what this float is. So let's go here and say the out new factor, right? Wow. And lots of typing errors today. All right, and let's just print this out and see what happens. So again, I got this value and I want to change it. You can see that it changed to exactly what I put here. So this is working. I'm passing in this value. So now why isn't it that this is working, right? Set Manhattan factor, whatever the factor is. I want to change one, which should change them all, right? Now this is grid 0, 0, right? That's what's happening here. So is this actually working? That's the challenge, right? Is this thing working? So again, I can check that. I can go back to my tile.cpp. I can go down to where I'm doing the setter for the Manhattan factor. Here's my Manhattan factor. I'm taking in a setter. It's dragging in this. It's changing the value of my Manhattan factor, and I set the target distance again for this particular grid, right, to whatever the goal location is. So I do that again. One thing to note is this goal location is something that you got to capture, which I've done in my version of the code. So one thing we can also do is let's check to see if it's getting here. So I'm going to do an std out again with my new factor, right? Does it even get here? These are little tests you can do to make sure that it's working. Okay, so let's try this out. And now we should see two of those, right? 1.414. So it looks like it's getting there. But let's see the grid. Does the grid change, right? So again, what I should be seeing is when I change this, the whole grid is rejigged. Like it changes automatically. That's what should happen. So these values here should change the value for the grid. Now, one thing to note is people would say, well, why are you doing it this way? So I'm changing, sure, it's coming in here, and I'm seeing that the change is happening once. And it's happening for grid 0, 0. Remember? I go here, and this, I'm changing it for grid 0, 0, but then they're like, but you're not changing it for everything, you're just changing it for one. But remember that if we did it right, these are statics, which means if we do it for one, we do it for all, right? Right? Here's a test, and this is what I did earlier. What if I took these values, and instead of using the getters and setters, let's not even use the getters and setters. Let's just drag these values out into the light. I like to call them, right? So let's make them public instead of private. Let's just comment these out for a second. And this is a test. And let's go back to my game.cpp, and instead of doing what I did here, I can just literally change this to that private variable. So again, testing, m_Manhattan factor. There it is. Here's my Manhattan factor. I'm definitely changing this way. And I need to pass in a reference to it for me to change it. And the same thing goes with here. Let's not even use the setter. Well, sure, let's use the setter, but we're going to just use this for the new factor. So let's just pull that in. So again, can I pull it? So this will definitely work. I know I've tested this before. So here it is, new factor, and it goes here. So we know that that's happening. So that's something we can try. And that's number one. So I can change it, and it's going to change the values. I'm going to definitely have access directly to this value. So it's not like I'm not having direct access. I have direct access. It's just that the grid doesn't seem to change. So if I notice I change this, I don't see the values changing at all. All right. All right. So one more thing to check before we stop for today, because I've had one of those days where last session, the slider wasn't working. This session, the numbers aren't changing. So let's go back to tile.cpp. Again, this is part of the challenge. Let's make this is working. So Manhattan factor is here. Here's my Euclidean factor, and this should change for all the tiles. Now, it could be changing for one tile. Let's make sure that it's operating factors, operating properly. Let's go back up to the top here. That's correct. What did I miss? All right, well, let's take a look and see what my Manhattan factor is here. So, I'll do that. So, cd out m underscore Manhattan factor. It should be the same. I know there's a problem though already. It looks like my static isn't working. So here's another hack. One of my buddies that I have, I just figured out what it could be. I know my buddy, he likes talking about hacks a lot. It's a friend of mine that does that a lot. And if he's watching, he knows what I'm talking about. But here's what I can do instead. So one thing I'm trying to do is change just one of them. Maybe it's changing, but it's behind the scenes. Let's change all of them, right? So I want to change this for all tiles. And the way to do that is actually to, let's go to where I change the tiles here. Give me one more second, guys, and I'll show you the solution. So where I want to change the pathfinding for the tiles. So I want to do the tile functions or grid functions. Here they are. And I have an example of this double for loop instead of me having to retype it. I'm going to go back down to here where I do that work, which is up here. And I want to do that instead. So I want to kind of do one of these, copy paste. So I'll say for everyone in the grid, I'll just do everyone separately now. Let us change the Manhattan factor. That's kind of overkill, but whatever. Now instead of it being in one place, it's everything. It's each column and each row that I'll change. When I change this, it changes everything. And then I can probably fix this back to what it was. Let's try it. So I want to just do it for one, and then the other one should follow. All right, cool. So here's the grid, and if I change the value, then yeah, that's what I was going to see. That works now. So what it's doing is it's changing every single one of them, right? So what this does, if I change the Manhattan factor really big, the values are huge. And what this does is it changes their path finding algorithm. So if I go find path, it definitely will crash. Yay, I'm having fun today. All right, but this totally worked. Yeah, this totally worked. So let's go back and fix it. That's the solution. I will post my solution later on. If you have a better solution, and again, if you did that bug hunting and figured it out, I welcome that. Let's put these back down here. I don't need to do this anymore. So I've kind of figured out my problem. Get rid of all this. And I'm going to re-enable the way of doing that. If I go back to my main, or my game, and all I need here is the getter, like I talked about. So I'll say get Manhattan factor, and I need a reference to it. So this is going to return a pointer, and I need to do the same thing over here. So whatever that value was, I'm pulling in here, and this has got to be the dereferencing of the pointer. There it is. And then I can use this one. I don't need to print this out anymore. I can use this one to pass it in here and make that change. This is complete. One thing also I put is inside of my tile.cpp where I set it. I want to take away that std out as well because I don't want to have that print out anymore. And now we should be able to do it. Let's take a look. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the solution up on GitHub, you know, all this kind of stuff as well. You see it. So now if I modify this, toggle grid, you can see that that changes. And if I want to change the other one, it's as simple as copy paste. So I go back to game CPP. Here's this. Let's make another one. We'll call it something else. We'll put it next to each other. So same line. I can use the same line. I am GUI attribute. And then I can call this Manhattan, and this will be Euclidean. Instead of Manhattan, it'll be Euclidean. And I'll take this and put it there. And again, what I want to do is use the Euclidean factor for that one. Euclidean. Is that thunder? That sounded pretty heavy to me, man. All right, so here it is. What does this look like? Let's run this thing. I should do both now. I should be able to change both values, and it should be both be able to affect my grid. Take a look at how big these are. I'm going to fix these in a second. So if I go toggle grid, then you can notice the values here. If I change one value and the other value, it'll modify these values so that it, depending on the distance, farther away will be bigger values than closer up. And if I click find path, we should be able to see a path that I can find, and I should be able to move my ship. Just turn this grid off. I should be able to move my ship now according to the path. So I can change those values, right? So why did I do all this? I wanted you to learn the user interface, number one. The second thing is I want to introduce like how I did the path finding with my little weird heuristic. I want you to do your own. It gives you a base to start with. One thing I want to change, one more thing before we stop, is you can put these two things and give them a bit of size by using this IMGUI push item width. I can do that. So at the top, I can say, well, I want these things to be only 80 long, and then I want to pop it afterwards. 80 characters is what this is, right? So I can say that after this is done, I want to pop that item width. And I also don't want to put them at the top like this at all. I want to take these ones and put them underneath my buttons, my little spammy buttons, my respawn mines, my toggle grid. I want to put them about right here, right? That's where they belong. And I can get rid of these. Now that I've done that, then the total UI will look like, if I did everything correct, let's just try it. This, right? So I notice I have my buttons. I can respawn my planet anywhere I want. I can toggle my grid on. You can see that the Manhattan distance, I want to change the factor to make it more what I want. I can also check to see what it does to these things. And the same thing, I can increase that as well. I can play with these values until I have the right value, and then I can put them in. And then when I do find path, hopefully it won't crash, didn't. And then if I press move along path, you can see that it's going to move my ship along the path, right, until it gets to the destination. It's pretty cool. Questions around this? Yeah. Well, the reason why I use double for loop is I'm going through each of the tiles in the grid, and I'm modifying each one individually. It should have taken it as a static and done it like that. Not sure why it's not working. I have to go back and check. There's definitely an optimization step here we can make, right? Yeah, yeah, totally. You want to change one, change them all, right? I'm just not. It must be Thunderman. All right. Any other questions? So guys, this solution I will post, but your participation will be due tomorrow night at midnight. Okay? Otherwise, good luck on your assignment and your lab. Remember that next week there'll be a take-home exam that I'll be putting out sometime around Tuesday. I'm gonna try and get it out around Tuesday, and then you have the rest of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, to get it done. You have 2 attempts, open internet, open book. Again, it's more of a study than anything else. I want you to study stuff. It's worth a pretty good, hefty amount of marks. So please don't forget to do it. If you forget to do it, that would be a very bad situation. All right? And then next Thursday, we're going to get together to go over any assignment questions that you have, any kind of exam help, those kind of things during lecture, and during lab, we'll do more of this. So I want to see what your assignment looks like by that point, okay? And that's it for me, guys. I'll see you next week.